Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Lee, my co-host. Welcome to my show, Spirit Talk. I've written a book called Conjoined, a Holocaust Haunting, One Man, Two Hearts and Me. It's a book that I've worked on with Lee. Lee is my good friend, but she's also a spiritual counselor, a licensed therapist, a channeler, medium, and so on. And I'm excited to have you as my guest host today. So welcome, Lee.
Thank you. We had a great show last week, so thanks for having me back. I know we got a great topic that we want to talk about today, so I'm really excited about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So today's topic is something I thought I could never imagine ever talking about it. I didn't think about it as a child, as an adult, but only until about 2018 when I had some working with you and had some sessions, the topic of an entity attachment came up. And what I'd like to do first is read a few paragraphs from my book during a session that we had together. Now, if you haven't tuned into last week, very briefly, I was on a mission. My father had changed his name from Avram Stein Sapir to Ari or Lea Kaplan during World War II. He found an ID during the war, and he used this alias for the rest of his life. Years ago, in 2018, I was on a mission to discover who was this man whose name I had inherited. And so I spent 6 months doing research and came up empty-handed. So I asked you, Lee, if you could help me maybe find a place in Europe where I could do some research. And you said, let's just conjure up his spirit. So we've had several sessions with this spirit named Lea Kaplan, and I'd like to read a few paragraphs from my book. So here the spirit Lea Kaplan is speaking through you. You were channeling him. He said, "It was in May of 1943 when I died of a head trauma, hypothermia, and starvation. My leg was broken and I was unconscious. At 19 years old, I lay on the frozen ground in the woods all alone. I died with bitterness and anger in my heart toward Hitler and Germany. All I wanted was to return to my home, to my family, to work in the store, and eventually marry and have children. I called out to God, but no one heard me." He was quiet. Then after a few moments, I said, "Lea, please go on." He said, "Your father found me in the morning, face down on the ground. He was in a state of fear and shock. He shook me, but my body did not move. Yet I was startled. Then he turned me over. I noticed that icicles had formed on my hair and beard overnight. He ransacked my clothes. I tried punching and fighting him off, but I couldn't defend myself. I looked down at my body, put two and two together, and realized that I was dead. Then I had enough sense to know that my spirit was out of my body and I had remained earthbound." "Is that when my father found your ID?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "He found my small pouch that contained my army ID and card along with my knife. Then he put the pouch inside his pants pocket. He removed my jacket, shirt, and boots. We were similar size, so my clothes fit him fine. As I said before, your father was in a state of desperation, hysteria, and fright. He was traumatized, not grounded or in his body. He was partially desensitized and his soul was in fragments. His energy was easily vulnerable. Now, entranced by this delivery of important information, I paid attention to every word. Aryeh continued, I made a quick decision. Just like the flea that hops on the back of a horse, I merge and attach my energy to your father's energy field. He didn't realize what had happened. I thought your dad could take me back to my hometown. This may sound strange to you, but it was easy jumping into his body. I gasped and said, You're a Dybbuk? See, a Dybbuk is a ghost or a wandering demonic soul that possesses the body of a living person. A Dybbuk can talk through the mouth of its host and perhaps cause severe mental illness. I always thought this was Jewish folklore, a bunch of superstitious legends from centuries long ago. Call me what you like, he said. Your father's emotions, along with my demeanor and rage and anger, all intertwined. He was possessed with my energy. So my emotional and mental state, coupled with his own traumatic experiences during the war, intensified. This is why your father became enraged, he said. This is beyond insanity, I thought. I was speechless. So that is the story of how this young spirit emerged into my father's body in the forests of Eastern Europe during World War II. So Lee, do you remember having that session and what you thought at the time? And have you dealt with entity attachments before?
Well, when I read your book, I thought, oh my gosh, I had channeled all that information. I'd forgotten it. It's been probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It's been a while. I think it was 2016. So no, I do not remember. I remember sitting on your couch and offering that information, but I don't remember all the details. So I was, as I said, really shocked. I have worked with entity attachments. I do that in my spiritual counseling practice. And so no, this is not new to me. But the day that we worked with you, or the days that we worked with you, those were the most comprehensive communications that I've had with one being, one entity.
And is this common? We're going to get into talking about entity attachments and who's prone to them. And I'm going to also talk a little bit more about what Judaism has to say about entity attachments. But is this a common phenomenon?
It's more common than what people might realize. If some people have ever seen the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze, where the entity or the being in the subway attaches itself to, again, the villain, I guess, in that movie, and then caused havoc and chaos. It's not unusual, and so we don't really understand it fully in the sense that we're not aware, because we may not see these beings, or we may not feel them, or we might not even know that we have an entity attachment, but it is uncommon. It is more common than we realize.
Right. Now, I had never even thought about entity attachments, but I do remember in 1973, I was 11 years old, and the movie The Exorcist came to the theaters, and I certainly didn't want to go because I'm very squeamish, but there were long lines and people saw the movie and they couldn't sleep for days after seeing the movie. Are all entity attachments that demonic?
I can't give a generalization of that. I think it just really depends on the vibration of the individual and how low their vibration is. So if their consciousness is in a lower frequency, then an entity will attach to it that's a vibrational match. So people who are depressed or suicidal or using drugs or alcohol, it lowers their frequency. And if they're in this lower state of consciousness, then a being can attach because it's like a host, like a parasite that can actually feel the sensations, and they enjoy the sensation of the drugs or the drinking or the emotions that attach, to that person.
I see. Okay. All right. I do hear some clicking in the background. I'm not sure if it's on my end or your end, or maybe it's a spirit.
Yeah, my end. I have to get some headphones. Keep talking.
Okay, I'll keep talking. So let me talk a little bit about what Judaism has to say about demonic possession. In the book of Samuel, Samuel was the prophet to the first king of Israel, King Saul, and this is 11th century BCE. There's a story there in the book of Samuel where it said that the Spirit of God had left King Saul and he was tormented by a spirit. And the prophet Samuel said, in order to exorcise this demonic soul from King Saul, we needed to bring someone who can play the lyre to help that out with the exorcism. So the prophet Samuel brought young David to King Saul, and David played his lyre and was able to exorcise the spirit from King Saul. So in essence, King David was the first exorcist in Jewish history. In the 12th and 13th centuries, when the Jews lived in Spain, in that area, the Iberian Peninsula, they lived amongst the Christians and the Muslims, and all three religions did have some belief system in spirits and devils and demons and dybbuk or entity attachments. But the Jews during the Spanish Inquisition, when they were expelled and they migrated into Eastern Europe, they kept a lot of these beliefs with them, and they moved. Many Jews lived in Sfat in northern Israel, and that became like the mystical center of Judaism. And a new form of Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, had evolved. Lurianic Kabbalah had evolved in the 1600s. And it was at that time that there were a lot of Jews who believed in reincarnation. They believed in the life after death. They believed in dybbuk, entity attachments, and all throughout Judaism, in the 5 books of Moses, or the Old Testament, and even in the Talmud, there are stories about angels and angels of death, and there are spells that the rabbis had to prevent demons. So you'll find a lot of information about angels and spirits and dybbuk all throughout history of the Jewish people. There was an exorcism that occurred in 2010 that was noted by a rabbi in Israel who tried to exorcise a dybbuk from a young Jewish man living in Brazil. They did this online and it wasn't successful. And there was talk that this young man had then gone to Israel. But exorcisms were common in Judaism. And what would happen was, if a rabbi, this is mostly in the 16th century, if a rabbi felt that someone in the community had was possessed versus being mentally ill, he would bring that person to the synagogue. The synagogue would surround the 10 pious men, a quorum of 10 men would surround this person. They would hold what I have here are black candles. They would hold black candles. And through verbal coercion, the rabbi would try to talk to this entity attachment, get to know its name, why it merged into this person's body. And through verbal coercion, it would try to exorcise the entity. Now, if that didn't work, then the rabbi would then blow this is called a shofar, a ram's horn. And when we use this a ram's horn during the high holidays, it's to wake us up. It's an alarm. And the rabbi would use this because the sharp, agonizing sounds of the shofar, of this ram's horn, would hopefully, these blasting noises would shock the dybbuk and it would jump out of the body. And I'm going to see if I can blow the horn here, blow the shofar, and you'll hear the kind of shocking noise. But it's a louder noise. I don't have the lungs for the capacity to do this. But this is what they use during the exorcism in hopes that the dybbuk would then leave the person's body.
Can I share my story of how I did an exorcism on my friend?
Absolutely.
So this is in the early 90s when I started channeling. I started channeling in 1993, and a friend of mine was coming to my office. I was doing massage therapy and also doing my channeling work simultaneously. And she came to get her massage, and she said to me, Lee, she says, I think I might be possessed by a bad angel. She said, I was at the train tracks and a thought came to me that maybe I'll just kill myself and pull my car on the train tracks and kill myself. And she had been feeling what she called these angels around her, or this one particular angel. She thought was an angel around her. And then she began to question after that day where she was having thoughts of maybe killing herself on the railroad track, that maybe this was not an angel. So she asked me if I could do an exorcism. I was early in my practice as a channeler, as one who worked with higher spirits. And lo and behold, this being was not an angel. It was a mischievous being. And the guide that I was working with then, Grand, came through. And I remember clearing the energy of that being from her energy field, and she could actually feel the energy and the being releasing. She was never troubled by that being ever again. And Grand advised her to not to call forth any beings, because when I started working with the angels and the guides, she thought she was ready to do that, but they told her she should just stick to meditation because her vibration was not high enough to be able to protect herself or guard herself or to work with higher beings. And so she had drawn to herself this being that was being harmful. So it was causing mischievous acts. It was causing her to act bizarrely. And to my surprise, like I said, in those early days, I was new to all this, that she felt the being leave and again was never troubled again. So that was indeed a shock to me that I was able to do that in my early days of my career. So it does work, and it is real.
Yes, it's unbelievable, actually, how this happens. I thought we could talk a little bit about how our energy, the energy of the earth, the collective consciousness of the earth, how all this has effect on us, has it effect on, as our souls leave our body, effect on the afterlife, because this all plays into the story of these demonic souls or these low energy souls. So let's first talk about what is collective consciousness of our planet Earth, and how does the energy affect this collective consciousness? You want to share?
Well, my understanding of the collective consciousness is that it is the energy of all the thought forms that have been emitted onto the planet throughout the course of time. So every time we think something positive, that energy goes out into the collective. If we have negative thoughts, if we have acts of violence or war, that energy gets emitted into the collective. To me, it's like a big cloud over the sky, that it's holding the frequency and the vibration. And so just as we have our own energy field, the planet has her own energy field as well. The original energy of what we call, I don't want to call it the fall of grace, but it was when we as spirits chose to come to this earth plane and forget our oneness with the great Godhead. We began to fall into what I call a state of fear and separation. We came to this earth plane originally as divine spirits with our full awareness, but then we began to separate ourselves from the Godhead, and fear began to set in because we were no longer connected to the energy of the God essence. So we began to have fear of survival, how we're going to take care of ourselves, fear of danger. Again, this fear began to become imprinted within the human consciousness and within the collective because of all that was being sent out. So just like my friend who had drawn this entity to her, her vibration was more fearful. I remember at the time, she's since passed away, but she drank a lot. And so Spirit told her that she shouldn't really be drinking. And so this entity was able to attach to her because she was drinking a lot. And so as we lower our frequencies for whatever reasons, and we begin to focus more on being fearful than we are of holding the energy of what we call our divine presence or divine essence connected to God, then we become, again, in a lower state of frequency. Most of us, and all of us that I know here on the earth plane, we all have fears. And yet if we can begin to discern that most of our fears are not warranted. Again, it's imprinted within us. It's a part of the collective. And yet if we can hold the energy of faith and hope and trust and allowance, then we can move past those lower frequencies and then move into the higher frequencies of love, compassion, divine wisdom, feeling our connection to the God essence, and really trusting that everything is in divine order.
So this collective consciousness is this set of beliefs and ideas and moral attitudes that operates as a unifying force. And when we are filled with fear, the fear that then kind of disperses into this collective consciousness, and it somehow it builds on this fear. And then when someone is filled with so much fear, does the collective consciousness have an effect on the person? And then it kind of, goes, it kind of revolves the collective consciousness to the person. The fear kind of gets trapped up there, and then the person who lives in fear picks up more fear. Is that how it works?
Well, I don't know all the details of all of that, but I do understand that like attracts like. And so if our vibration or frequency is of fear, then we will attract fear to us.
Okay.
So we've talked about that before with some of your own fears and how to be mindful of what you project out will come back. So
Right.
like a magnet, whatever you're focusing on will come back to you. So again, within the collective consciousness, this energy is pervasive. Just like now, or we've been into a pandemic for a couple of years, people's fears are heightened. And so we feel it, we sense it. That energy is very real. So if you ever walked into a store and you can see the fear in someone's eyes because you've gotten too close to them, or they're afraid, you're going to cough on them or sneeze on them or whatever. And so this energy is really palpable and so this is a part of that energy that's pervasive, that is really needing to be cleared. So it's for each person to take responsibility for their own fears so that we don't continue to contribute to the collective, and to be able to detach to the best of our ability from the collective fear so that we are not in that state. We see
The fear can spread quickly. It reminds me of
well, that's a part of the media, like what happens with
right,
television and internet, and we read something, and so then it's like, oh my gosh, this is happening, and then we become fearful. So that energy is pervasive, and so we're collecting it, we're bringing it into our being. So we're all have that frequency within us, and yet then we're being bombarded. We're overstimulated by this fear. So no wonder people are mentally unbalanced, or they're sick, or people are going crazy, and there's road rage, and there's mass shootings, and there's just so much that's going on with people's psyche. And yet people, in many ways, their energy field is very fragile because of all that's happening. And if you're not mentally balanced and grounded, then you can succumb to even greater fear and become even more paranoid and out of control.
right, right. So during the 1930s in Germany, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. It started to take root and in the German culture, and Hitler had spread horrific lies against the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of fear within the German culture, so much fear on how to survive financially because they've just dealt with World War I. They were just, and Hitler encouraged and breeded this fear, and it spread like a wildfire. There was so much hysteria and hatred against the Jews, so that eventually 6 million Jews were murdered because of this fear. And that is like the collective consciousness of this country had caused such enormous pain worldwide. How it began with any comments or is.
Well, it just makes me think of the epigenetics in terms of how it's passed down from generation to generation. That frequency, that vibration is held, with one's DNA. And so your dad was a Holocaust survivor, but you also lived with his fear, but also within your own physical structure. You're kind of a nervous, anxious person, and so there's a lot of fear that you also hold. So I'm sure that you are being affected by what happened to not only to your father energetically, but also from the collective what happened to the Jewish people during the Holocaust.
Right. Now, do I appear, for people who don't know me, who just see my external, they think I'm a very calm or serene-like personality. But for someone who knows me quite well, you understand that I have a lot of fear inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this fear has been passed down from generation to generation. I talk about the science of epigenetics in my book, and how the trauma of your grandparents or parents, we're talking about war, famine, just major trauma that affected their lives, will be through the DNA will be transferred to the next generation. So on a physiological level, it is there. In addition to my father being traumatized, and he brought his this trauma into my home. And so I have he had the highest form of PTSD, but in essence, I also have PTSD. I have a startle reflex. I get nervous if, like I have to control my environment, and I can't be around cats or dogs or butterflies, or things will just come into my my field of vision. I just get really started, or loud noises will startle me. And I'm guessing that's all part of the epigenetics.
Mm-hmm. And your home invasion didn't help anything.
No, yeah.
And bringing that up in terms of, I remember you talking about saying, well, what if something happened to your children, and then the home invasion, occurred. So part of that energy, we're talking about, it like attracts like. Your fear, I believe, manifested that frequency to you and drew that experience to you. Not only thus you had stated it and put it out into the world, in the collective. Well, what if something, someone ever harmed my children? And so then it manifested itself. So you can see the power of that manifestation can happen rather quickly.
So what happened is I had forgiven my father, and I also went back to Poland and had forgiven those men that murdered my family, my grandmother, my aunts. And I thought, well, as difficult as it was to forgive my father on his deathbed, I forgave him. He couldn't hurt me. And as difficult as it was to forgive those perpetrators of that Holocaust, those murderers that murdered my family, well, I could forgive them. And I know that no one's going to come knocking on my door no Nazi's going to come on my door trying to hurt me. And then I put out, well, what if someone would dare hurt my children? Could I be able to forgive them? And then a few months later, I had a home invasion where 3 men with masks and guns came into my home. 2 of my children were home, and we all had guns to our head, tied up. It was the most horrific 5 minutes of my life. None of us were physically harmed, though I was bruised and thrown down on the floor. But that five minutes caused such trauma in my body that it took me a good year to recover from.
Mm-hmm.
And that startle reflex that I had just intensified. But I do remember thinking, what if? And then all of a sudden, a few months later, the what if came to be.
Mm-hmm. And so that's somewhat of an example, I guess, of the collective in terms of what is sent out there being brought back into you, or you're bringing it back into your awareness or into your reality. So it's be mindful of what you're thinking or what you're feeling or what you're sending out.
Yeah.
Again.
And now, as much as this energy of fear has such an impact on the collective consciousness, has an impact on ourselves and on our DNA and all that, but what about positive energy? What about the energy of love and how does that affect us and the people around us? And what do you think about that?
Well, when we send out positive vibrations and we hold that frequency within our own system, people actually literally feel it. I have people tell me, my niece in particular and my brother-in-law particularly tell me that I'm a calming effect. They feel peace when they're in my presence. I don't necessarily feel peaceful all the time like you. Don't always feel, maybe nervous all the time. I don't always feel in this peaceful state by any means, shape, or form. But they both feel this sense of, oh, all is well. They feel calm within my presence. So energetically, they're picking up the vibration, or I call it the core of the essence of me. The essence of my energy must be peace. And so the same thing, as we send that vibration out into the world, then we make a difference. The earth actually is a living, breathing entity. And so as we admit love, peace, harmony, and balance, as we bring that out into the world through our meditations, by walking, through mantras, by simply going out into the earth and just sending love and gratitude to the earth will actually feel that energy and that vibration and respond accordingly. In my home, I had invoked the vibration of peace into my home several months ago. I had gone to Asheville, North Carolina, and did an activation and activated and brought forth the energy of peace from the Crystal Kingdom underneath the land there in Asheville, underneath the mountains, onto the surface. I asked and prayed that peace come forward through the crystalline kingdom, and I asked that energy now be in my home. When people walk into my home, they actually feel very comfortable here. They feel very peaceful here. And I've only been here about 5 months, and this is the most peace that I've ever felt in my life. I feel very calm and centered and balanced. So I know that vibration, that frequency is being emitted into my home because I'm able to feel it, and other people are able to respond to it and feel it as well.
I know that when I travel, there are certain parts of the world that you just feel so alive. The feels so pristine and pure. I remember going my husband before the pandemic to the glaciers in southern Argentina. We see these white glaciers with this cobalt blue glistening in between the white. And it and when you walk through them and take a boat near them, it just feels so pure, as if there was just pure white, bright light there. And then when my husband and I traveled, we went to Auschwitz, the death camp in Poland, and Treblinka, another death camp, that it felt so heavy there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can feel in certain areas of the earth, there are some areas that just feel so good. And there are other areas that you just want to avoid.
Well, it's all energy. The power centers, the sacred sites, the vortices, say like Sedona or Glastonbury in England, or perhaps the place that you went in Argentina, as you said, Argentina?
Yeah, southern Argentina.
Perhaps that was a power center. It was a vortice where there's powerful energy that's coming, from the earth or to the earth there, and people actually feel it. The same as when you went to Germany, to Auschwitz, where all the death, you could actually feel the energy, because that energy, more likely, all that fear and violence and hatred and negativity is still imprinted within the earth. So energy is very real, very palpable. You've walked into a part of town where you're like, or you're driving a part of town and you're like, oh, this feels really nice. This feels really calm. And again, you can go to another section of this same town and the vibration feels different. That's, again, the collective vibration of the consciousness of the people and the energy of the land, as well as the people bringing their consciousness out, and you can feel it. It's very real. It's very palpable.
Right. And then we also are a vortex of energy. So each of us hold our energy, and sometimes you can be around someone who, like you said, feels so good. And sometimes there are other people that their vibes kind of don't mesh with your vibe. So you can sense, I know now that I just want to surround myself now with people who I feel good around and go to places where I feel good. And a lot of people, like the listeners out there, can you tell the difference between places where you feel alive and feel the love and feel the positiveness of the earth? And can you sense other places where you feel the opposite? And it's just so fascinating, because when you were a child, like you knew, I don't want to be around this person or this family member, but there were certain family members that I always wanted to be around. And I didn't understand it at the time, but now I understand that it's like the energy they hold. Do I want to be around this type of person?
Yeah, because oftentimes we've been around people who drain us, energy vampires who would drain our energy, or immediately we might feel irritated or uncomfortable around them.
Right.
Or again, we're around people who uplift us and we feel joyful and peaceful. So everything's all a frequency. And again, it's a part of what you're sending out in your own thought forms, but also what energy vibration was within your own auric field.
Right. So, and then we also leave like an energetic imprint. So wherever I go, there's a bit of the energy from me that I've left in that spot. And to me, it's like you walk into an elevator and you smell the perfume of someone who had just left. It's as if, just like someone that leaves their scent of their perfume, we do leave energetic imprints wherever we go, and hopefully we'll leave positive energy imprints wherever we go.
That's why it's to be mindful when we go out into the world that we protect ourselves from other people's energies, not to be fearful, but simply to know that someone else has been in the same seat that we are sitting in. Somebody's in the same on the same road that we're driving in. And so they've left their energy there, and we're all picking up on that, again, that collective.
Right.
And
So
so
now,
it's like taking a shower or changing our clothes. It's important to be able to clear the frequencies of, again, the outer world from our energetic frequency. People will do that through using sage or using the white sage to clear your home. They may use essential oils in some way to clear their frequency. I will just literally just take my hand and just clear the energy and send the energy with love to earth, clear my energy till I feel it cleared. Or I'll send the energy back to its original source with love, so that these frequencies are not affecting me. Or again, it's like smoke, that it's like, oh, I got to clear this so that I can see clearly, I can feel clearly, I can be sovereign over my own energy field again.
So now, my father, who was in a state of trauma, he witnessed his mother and sisters murdered. Then he ran into the forests of Eastern Europe, living there for 3.5 years. So he was in a state of trauma, unable to process what had just happened to him, and always looking behind his back, wondering if there's a Nazi, a dog, a German Shepherd, or someone who was trying to kill him. This was ongoing daily for 3.5 years. So he was very vulnerable. And I think you've mentioned before that there are people who aren't physically healthy or mentally healthy or emotionally healthy. They also are weakened and as if their whole body is traumatized. And so when your body is traumatized, the entity attachment, Arye, in my book, had said that my father was easily vulnerable. So it was easy to attach himself into my father. So people who are vulnerable to entity attachments are people who may be like drug addicts or alcoholics or any other type of people that you can.
People who have psychiatric problems, mentally ill people who are traumatized, that have gone through some level of trauma. I'm sure that the people in Ukraine now are will be affected because of all that they've gone through. People who've been in car accidents, also people who have lost family members unexpectedly through death, shock, physical trauma to your health, getting a diagnosis maybe of cancer, or that you only have a few months to live. People go into an altered state of consciousness and can be affected by lower vibrational frequencies. So any type of trauma.
And how would somebody know? I mean, you shared an example of this woman that worked with you, but how would you know that if someone is possessed? How would you know? Are there any signs or symptoms that a person exhibits?
If a person's behavior is much different or erratic or unusual in some fashion from their normal personality or their normal behavior, if someone begins to start drinking more, or starts using drugs, or starts being promiscuous, or becomes irresponsible and maybe wanting to run away from home. I'm a married lady who's happily married, and something's happened and she's like, I'm going to leave my family and leave my kids. Anything that might be unusual, that a person may identify that this is not my normal behavior, this is not my normal self.
So there's a possibility of an entity attachment. And
it could be. Doesn't mean it is, but it could be.
And what about these massive shooters?
I believe a lot of those have entity attachments. I believe those souls are confused for whatever reason. I don't know if all the people have mental illness. But I trust that that's probably the case. And so these entities come in and they want to kill because it satisfies some sensation for them as the entity attachment. Maybe not in all the cases, but I would say a great deal of them.
Okay. So, so your suggestions for how to keep ourselves in a positive light, how to keep us mentally stable, and well, for me, for example, is I try not to listen to the news. Because when I watch the news, I am so filled with fear and angst, and there's nothing I can do, like when what's going on with Ukraine now with Putin and the Russians invading Ukraine. I feel so helpless. And when I sit and watch the news, I get so anxious and filled with fear. And I know that many Holocaust survivors or people who've gone through war who are tuning in and listening, they are triggered and they become anxious and filled with fear. So I know for myself, I try not to watch the news. I try to watch shows that are comical, that are lighthearted. I don't want to watch any or listen to any horror stories. Sometimes my husband would say to me, would be talking, whatever, and he'd hear, oh, do you want to hear what happened today? And he starts by, and there's a negative story, a murder or this or that. And I say to him, for every one story you're going to share with me, give me 5 positive stories or don't. So one thing I do is I just don't want to listen to the news. And even on Facebook, there's so much, like the fear, the conspiracy theories, everything goes viral and people get so fearful. Like I try not to spend much time on Facebook either and choose what I want to read.
Well, that's the epidemic is fear. The pandemic is fear. That's what I talked about in my channeling session. The pandemic is fear. And so as we begin to raise our vibration into a higher state than fear, then we're less affected by what we see or experience or what's happening within our world. I'm not saying you can 100%, but you can become what I call a detached observer, where you're not connected to the emotion or to the energy of what's happening. So you can stay away from the television set, you can stay away from your telephone, you can certainly ground yourself by going outside and walking, doing meditation, doing anything where you can calm your mind and stay grounded and centered. And again, clearing your energy field if you're feeling like you're, what I call it, just got heavy energy on you. If someone has yelled at you or they've been mean at you or whatever it is, you just clear the energy, send their energy back to them with love. Just continue to keep your energy as clear as possible. Whatever works for you, however way that you can keep your energy clear. Again, being outside in nature, connecting to nature is probably the number one. And if you're not able to do that, simply go into quiet meditation and continue to focus love into your heart and begin to breathe in the vibration of peace. That's what I will have people do, is they call in their I am presence. I love to invoke the vibration of I am that I am into my heart, because it raises my frequency and I can really feel this within my heart. I'm not going to say it real loud here, but when I teach, I will invoke the I am presence. I am that I am. I am that I am. I am that I am. And when I do that, I feel this energy within my heart, and it jumpstarts my energy field, and I really begin to feel empowered in a sense of peace, where I'm able to move through again the extraneous energies that perhaps are affecting me. I love to use that. It really helps me a lot.
And I do know that when I've asked friends where they feel most connected to God or where they feel most spiritual or uplifting is, they say in nature. And they feel like, go hug a tree, I walk down to Lake Michigan and I feel so alive. I'm walking through the ravines and the streams until I get to the lake, and just sitting by the water, I feel cleared, and I love walking through there. So yeah, so these are some of the things we can do to help uplift us and make us feel good, and try to avoid that fear from taking over us.
And contributing to the fear of the collective consciousness.
Right. Any last words you'd like to say, Lee?
I can't think of any in this moment. I just ask people to be mindful of their own thoughts and what they're projecting on the world, into the world, because at this time, again, as I said, like attracts like. So if you're bringing forth the energy of love and positivity, that will continue to create. If you continue to create fear and negativity, uncertainty, then you're contributing. Do you want to be part of the problem, or do you want to be a part of the solution?
Right. Amen. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Lee, for joining me on today's program. And next week, we will have another interesting topic. We will talk about past life regression, and we have lots to cover next week, and we hope to see you all then.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.